The biggest time when this myth of the Swedish successful socialist model is around the 1970s, when the country has had 100 years of low taxes and has built a very impressive welfare model and created income equality with low taxes for each of the past 5 decades. There is a very strong link between tax rate and GDP growth, so that countries with a higher tax stagnate more. I mean, the UK, as we're raising the tax, you'll see massive stagnation coming up.
Hello and welcome to this IEA podcast. My name is Reem, Ibrahim, and I'm the head of media at Linda Whetstone Scholar here at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Today, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by our star guest, Dr. Nima Sanandaji, who is a Swedish author, researcher, and public policy scholar known for his work on entrepreneurship, innovation, and welfare reform. He is the director of the European Centre for Entrepreneurship and Policy Reform, the ECEPR, and has written extensively on the Nordic model, social mobility, and economic competitiveness. He has written a co-authored briefing book for the Institute of Economic Affairs on the welfare state myth, alongside his co-author, Stefan Forster. Thank you so much for joining me, Nima.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really glad for this.
Amazing.
You know, I grew up like a refugee, foster home, all that stuff, welfare. And my dream at school was to write one day for Institute of Economic Affairs. So it's really nice to be.
It's so wonderful to have you, and it's so wonderful that you're able to write this brilliant book as well, because it's so important. I think it's really interesting from a wider perspective, because there is this narrative that the Nordic model is a sort of be-all and end-all when it comes to welfare reform. So could you tell me a little bit about what the book is actually about and what your intention was behind writing it?
If I give you a little longer background, I've written for like 2 decades. I've been just writing study after study about Nordic societies. At first, I was doing national research and these studies. Now I only do many studies with many different, companies and organizations in Sweden. And a lot of it is international or pan-European. And I always had this, what is this myth they have about Sweden? It just never made sense to me, because the biggest time when this myth of the Swedish successful socialist model is around the 1970s, when the country has had 100 years of low taxes and has built a very impressive welfare model and it created income equality with low taxes. And just as we're switching to raising the taxes, this fantastic model, look how long they're living. Yes, after 100 years with free markets, right? And then they keep saying it's socialist. Let me just say a few facts about Sweden people don't know. The first company with shares is not a UK invention or a Dutch invention. It's the copper mine in Falun, the most important Swedish economic activity ever in if you look at the history, is this copper mine. That's the first company in shares in the world. And you might think modern banking, I mean, it comes from different places, Babylonia, Italy. But the modern banking system with central banking, where is the first central bank from? Sweden, Stockholm. Where is the first European credit note? I mean, the system of credit in the capitalist model. The same bank, Stockholm Banco, that became Riksbank. So big parts of modern capitalism, including women fully in capitalism. One of the first places, UK, Maine, Delaware, Sweden. So it's like really capitalist country. I mean, big parts of modern capitalism are actually Swedish inventions. And then everybody just, no, they're such a successful socialist model. So yeah, sure, 100 years of success and progress and good welfare outcomes with low taxes, and then 50 years switching to high taxes, just getting massive problems in relation to this. Getting massive problems dealing with integration, since the welfare state traps immigrants in poverty traps, all that. And at least 30 years of just everybody trying to reform the Nordic societies to more free markets, trying to reduce the tax level. So it's where exactly is the success of socialism? You might argue for the success of Nordic societies. I never see that it's the success of the high tax model.
That's really interesting. And you're saying that countries with lower taxes, with a low tax model in which you're describing it as not socialist, which is obviously contrary to, I think, a lot of the contemporary narratives around the Nordic model, so to speak.
Right.
And what you're saying is that they tend to have better welfare outcomes. Could you explain what that looks like and why that may be the case?
Yeah, so this book systematically looks at, broad welfare outcomes and just compares all advanced economies with at least 1 million adults. And I think many people would assume that, okay, so first of all, we show that for each of the past 5 decades, there's a very strong link between tax rate and GDP growth. So that countries with a higher tax stagnate more. I mean, the UK, as you're raising the tax, you'll see massive stagnation coming up. I'm absolutely sure of this. This has been the pattern for every one of the past 5 decades. And historically, it's always been the pattern, by the way. I mean, Ibn Khaldun said this 600 years ago. It's never really changed. But I was like, Stefan, we have to write this book because people assume all the time that the better welfare outcomes are in the high tax countries, but they're not. And as we show in this book, so if you have social exclusion, yes, it's slightly less in high tax countries, but not, I mean, many, like Switzerland, for example, many low tax countries, Switzerland, Japan, they actually succeed pretty well in having low social exclusion. So you can manage that without having high taxes. Health, you have very good health outcomes in Australia with low taxes, Japan, Korea, and sure, you can have bad health outcomes and low taxes like the Americans, but it's the diet and all the lawsuits raising their health costs. So, and then when you look at education, it's clearly so that low tax countries have better outcomes. I'll get into that. And when you look at labor market, clearly better for low tax countries. And overall, so we build a welfare measure where we do a standardized metric. We look at most data is 10-year average, and we put like, a 1 to 10 ranking, relative rankings, and measures. So it's like as objectively as we can. And it clearly shows that overall welfare is actually better in low tax countries. We also go into saying, okay, what if we use alternative measures? And showing some of the chapters of the book doesn't really matter. It's not a measure cherry picking thing. This is the case. And then we developed the theory of the welfare state crowding out based on this. But I just want to go and say the two welfare metrics where you really have a strong advantage in better welfare by having lower taxes, right?
And why is that the case? So you're measuring welfare based on things like healthcare and employment, right? Why is there that link between a low tax economy in which there is perhaps more economic growth and better welfare outcomes?
Right. So, I mean, if you look historically, the big economic thinkers, like, you have 2,500 years ago, Xenophon describes, while invading the Persian Empire, describes the how economical scale works. Basically, what Adam Smith says 2,000 years later. Then you have like people like Ibn Khaldun, 600 something years ago, explaining how Tunisian economists explaining how specialization forms the economy, and he basically says, higher taxes crowd out private sector. And then you have Arthur Laffer with the napkin and writing the Laffer-Khaldun curve 600 years later. And then you have Baumol, who comes and says that if you have a big public, basically says, an interpretation of his theory basically, is that if you have a big public sector without productivity increase, you might think, okay, but the capitalist system can afford this because the capitalist system has growth, so it can afford it. But basically, if you have a big sector without productivity growth, it's not very intuitive, but it becomes more and more expensive to pay for it because the rest of the economy is getting more efficient, but you still have to raise the wages in the inefficient sector so somebody works there. So you're paying more you're paying for less, essentially. And so it's not sustainable. Even if the big part of the economy is private sector and growing, you just can't have a big part of the economy just stagnating in productivity. And there's a lot of studies that show that public sectors tend to stagnate in productivity. But then what we do is actually, for the first time I myself have done, is create a new economic theory, is that the welfare state crowding out effect, in that high taxes crowd out economic growth, private sector activity. High public expending crowds out also private sector activity. In Australia, they have shown that the optimal level is 31% public expenditure. So like something like 25% taxes, 31% public expenditure, that would be growth optimal. All countries are above this. Like the lowest tax countries like Australia are actually close to optimum. South Korea, these countries. But we basically say, okay, but what is our new theory showing? Firstly, big welfare states crowds out. Now, I don't go into this that much in this book or in other projects. Norms of responsibility, norms of benefit morale, all these things are crowded out. The second thing is that if you look at the employment, there is a small employment difference in low tax countries having less unemployment, but there's a big difference in low educated people's. And I grew up on welfare and foster homes. It's like you just trap really immigrants, big groups in welfare dependency, and just destroy their social capital. So you have economic poverty created by very little incentives for low productive families to work and to learn the language and build networks and climb in productivity. And even natural experiments in Norway. There's a natural experiment that shows that if you give more welfare, you trap families in intergenerational poverty. And it's a quasi-natural experiment, so you can't argue against it. And so much other stuff support it. And the other welfare state crowding out mechanism is in education. Mm-hmm. So we have the 3 PISA subjects as our metrics. And it's very clearly so that low-tax countries are better. I want to give 2 examples to compare with Sweden. One is not in our sample, Estonia, because they have just under 1 million adults, but they actually spend half as much on education as Sweden. Better outcomes, more even outcomes. And among the young generation, it is not longer Sweden that has most engineers and researchers, it's Estonia. And then Ireland also. Ireland has more brain business jobs than Sweden nowadays. This is another project I do, the brain business jobs of Europe with Nordic capital. But they're actually number 1 together with Switzerland, and Sweden is number 3rd, even though Sweden is number 1 in engineers and researchers among all the population. Ireland is ahead because they just have so much better tax policy and, getting the growth. But they now also have better school outcomes. And Ireland used to be so far behind Sweden in economic development and school outcomes. Just shows you low taxes gives better school outcomes. Why? I mean, a pupil in Estonia or Ireland knows if I become an engineer, it's going to be massive wage difference if I fail school. And the teachers know that, and the parents know that. So everybody's pushing for, no excuses, good model, good results. Whereas, of course, you don't have that in countries where much of it is taxed away or distributed away. So that's the welfare state crowding out. And then also it's what happens if people have, again, it's not in our sample, Malta, but Malta has, it used to be that very recently, if you had a newborn baby girl or baby boy, expected healthy life years, according to Eurostat, was highest in Sweden. Now Sweden has slipped down a bit. Malta is number 1 for both boys and girls. Low taxes. Used to be a pretty poor country, completely ruined in the Second World War, gradually coming up, but they have limited low taxes. So what are people doing when they have low taxes? They're going to the gym, getting personal training, spending, So it's very important to realize that the welfare state, in fact, as our book shows, too much welfare state carves out not only economic growth, but also welfare outcomes.
And is it something to do with the welfare spending inherently crowding out those elements of the market that perhaps will improve welfare outcomes in people's lives? Or is it to do with specifically the way the welfare is structured, or the fact that it doesn't provide people with that agency? You very eloquently discussed the idea that actually a lot of people end up being trapped in a cycle of welfare dependency. Is that just to do with the way that the welfare state, generally speaking, in European countries is structured? Or is it just that welfare spending as a whole is rather damaging in that respect?
Okay, so the first effect is that high taxes crowd out private sector activity. The second effect is that the corresponding high public expenditure also on top of it crowd out private sector activity. Then you have the effect on the norms of people, particularly if you get them trapped in welfare dependency. But I mean, I like in Sweden, you have a big collapse in the benefit norms. It's now a common view among the youth that it is okay to some degree to claim benefits you're not entitled to. A few generations ago, it was really against this. They crumbled the norms. And also among the Swedes, it's not just the immigrants. They crumble the norms with everybody. Of course, the welfare entrapment is more with the immigrants. And then you're crowding out, you're crowding out, let's say, private health expenditure. So yes, it's absolutely on system design. For example, design the healthcare model based on insurances, and then have some public safety nets in that model, like Switzerland does it really well. Netherlands kind of does it well if you want to have a big welfare state, but still you get a slimmer model. You need to stop having these global welfare models. I went through this as a refugee. Just such a mess, and people really dislike it. Obviously, why are we having all across Europe?
And what is good about the systems in in Switzerland, and in the Netherlands specifically?
Well, I mean, I just meant that they have insurance models for health, and then you have competition between insurers, and then you have competition between health providers, and the government goes on, to some limited degree just regulates the overall system. And people, and I like more the Swiss model. I think it should be, you should encourage people to also privately invest. Shouldn't be that this idea, no, nobody can have more health than anybody else.
Yeah.
I think the big thing would be longevity. So I think this idea was gonna just not work anyways. But regardless, if you want to have a big welfare model system, then you should do like Netherlands. If you want a free market model, look at Switzerland. Don't look at US for healthcare, for example. So all low tax countries are not good in their welfare. We say this specifically: lower taxes will not give you better welfare, but the global pattern is, on average, they have better welfare. So why have high taxes and limit your progress, and get on average less welfare? But it's about system design.
I think this is absolutely fascinating, especially with regard to those specific outcomes that you discuss in the book. Let's talk a little bit about the UK for a moment. So obviously in the United Kingdom, welfare spending is extremely high. I mean, public spending as a proportion of GDP overall is about 44%. And that is continuing to increase as time goes on, because welfare spending is increasing in so many ways. And of course, it does, of course, include things like healthcare spending. We've got demographic changes and things like that. And in the book, you talk about the fact that the UK is, currently ranks 20th in healthcare outcomes. And when it comes to things like cancer survival rates and mortality rates, avoidable mortality rates, the UK ranks pretty poorly. And yet we spend a lot of money on welfare. Could you explain why there is that disparity?
Yes. My advice to you is just take all your policies and copy Ireland's policies, right? Or Malta. Aren't they? They're Anglo-Saxon European countries that are, outpacing the UK in healthy life years, GDP growth, employment, innovation ability. Ireland, if not. So there you go. There you have your comparison. Your system. They both have English as language. Of course, I'll give you this. A Swedish comparison to just show you. If you look at Sweden, 1970, out of the big countries in the world, they had the highest expected lifespan. When they were just transitioning from low taxes to high taxes. If you look now at the lifespan list, Sweden is number 8, and 5 countries climbed it. One is Ireland, your low tax neighbor you should copy. One is Australia, another Anglo-Saxon low tax country. South Korea with low taxes, Japan with low taxes. So all 5 countries that climbed the top 10 list are low tax countries. So you want, and the UK, clearly you have the national health system, which is very state is controlled. But I mean, you have all the
Expensive.
limitations. Yeah. So you have all the limitations of a big public sector, and expanding the public sector will just shrink the economy. And as we show now, we did theory for it for the first time, you have welfare state crowding out. You just don't have Bommel's cost disease. You actually have the welfare state coming and crowding this out. I think what our book does is, in the same way that some researchers came and said, wait a minute, it's not just high taxes that crowd out, it's also high public expenditure. Both of them crowd out. We say that yes, and on top of that, ultimately you start crowding out welfare expenditure also. So keep taxes at 25% around that, government expenditure around 31% around that, and you probably will just get maximum amount of growth. And a growth in turn, by the way, allows you to have more welfare, but also that people are not getting bad incentives from the government, and so that you crowd out the student working hard in school, and you crowd out people having money to pay for a personal trainer and stuff like that. So learn also from the Swedish experience. I think the UK, I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question. I think the UK will learn. I think I will be writing studies about how to learn from the mistake of the UK to raise the taxes. Absolutely. That's what I think. I'm sorry to say that, but
it's a pretty abysmal state that we're in. It's interesting because the book, I think, it's absolutely brilliant to be able to challenge this narrative, because conventional wisdom is that in order to improve welfare, you have to increase public spending. And in order to increase public spending, you obviously have to raise that revenue through taxation. So what you're doing is you are challenging the conventional wisdom that is better welfare outcomes come from more spending. And I think that link is really quite groundbreaking, because what you were saying is that the current model that basically every single country in the world is striving for, which is a larger, more comprehensive welfare system, what you are saying is that isn't necessarily the best way to improve welfare. And in those specific categories where you look at education and healthcare outcomes, it's fascinating that you're able to think about why it is that those people do that. Why is it that in a richer country, you have better welfare outcomes? And we look at this with the Nanny State Index, which is an index of European countries looking at how nanny status that their government is. And there is no correlation whatsoever between how much the government regulates healthcare, or indeed your lifestyle, and life expectancy. But where there is absolutely a correlation is between life expectancy and GDP. If a country is richer, they have better life expectancy and they have better healthcare outcomes. And I suppose this is really where this link comes from. So could you explain why it is you decided to look at low taxes, and why low taxes specifically was the measure that you were looking at?
I have to say that it is also low taxes. Estonia is not as rich as Sweden. Give them time, but they're not. And they spend something like half, maybe it's slightly higher now, but it was recently half. Maybe it's like 60%, 55% now, but half per student as Sweden does, and they have better outcomes in school, much better. So there you see that.
And that's
clearly
not to do with GDP. That's to do with
no. Sweden has higher GDP per capita. Just shows you, because obviously, where would you study harder, in Sweden or Estonia? And they actually, among the younger generation, Estonia surpassed Sweden in share of population or engineers and scientists. I'd like to say something with some retrospectives, since it was my dream to work with the IEA, so I've done it for some years. I think like 13 years ago, I wrote my first study on the Swedish welfare state with you, and like couple of months ago, there was an editorial in the New York Times with David Brooks, Why I'm Not a Liberal, where he quoted that study, where I think I had like that the Swedish Americans had exactly the same poverty rate as the Swedes, measuring it on the same way, right?
Is that right? The Sweden and America has exactly the same poverty rates.
This is 13 years ago, so Swedish Americans and Swedes have and so that really spread. I was so happy to get quoted in the New York Times more than a decade after it came out. And then 10 years ago, I think 10 years ago, Scandinavian exceptionalism came out, culture markets and the failure of terrible socialism. And it really spread all over the world. And really, I mean, even scientifically, so many quotations and public policy debate and translations. So I hope the welfare state myth gets some of that attention over time. I think it's fun for first time to have a new economic theory. And I mean, I just why low taxes? I've done hundreds of studies. I mean, all of them clearly. So often you see this, that the low tax countries have more breathing room for freedom degrees for things to happen, positive things.
And on education, so you're speaking a bit about healthcare. On education, why is it that a low tax country has better educational outcomes?
Because the incentives are higher for the person, and the parents know this, and the teachers know this, and the pupils know this. I have a friend who used to be the director of the Robert used to be director of the Swedish Taxpayers Association, and his daughters are very ambitious, his children all. And he told me a few times that my daughters have these dreams how rich they're gonna be as engineers. They don't understand it doesn't make such a big difference. They're gonna tax away so much of that. He was like in a dilemma with his growing daughters. How much did he break their heart? So they stopped studying that hard because he knows tax policy so well, and they had dreams, and then he was like,
all your money
instead. Right, so he finds it even difficult to encourage inherent, working ethics and future strive, because he knows the reality when they grow up, they're not going to be able to afford so much more because of all the hard work. I think that's really important element of it.
Okay.
Because you found you affect how people build up a character.
And it's the incentives that they have to actually be successful and entrepreneurial, I suppose. Why is it then that the United States doesn't necessarily have better welfare outcomes, or would you say that it does in certain states? I mean, there is obviously differences in the tax level and indeed in the tax burden across different states in the US. Right. But generally speaking, they have lower taxes and a higher GDP. Why do we see that correlation still, that they have better welfare outcomes?
I would say that the US is the exception to the rule that okay. Low tax countries have good welfare. So on health, it's very clear to say why they have bad welfare outcomes. Firstly, they have their own version of not socialism, but lawyers just coming in and over, like, not but I mean, they create so much costs by suing everybody. So it's like you don't have that in Europe. It's a kind of massive overregulation they have over large parts of US economy, and particularly in health. So, okay. And the other thing is it's like, this is why I never moved to the US. I wanted to as a youth. I mean, bread in the US is typically not bread. It's one of the oldest things humans do. They just eat so, I'm sorry to diss the Americans, but they eat so unnatural foods, right? It's just a cultural thing or something that they just have more unnatural foods.
Yeah, I mean, their bread doesn't go off. The American bread doesn't go moldy. You could leave it for weeks and weeks and it wouldn't go moldy.
I lived 1 year
in the preservatives.
I lived 1 year in Cambridge doing biotech research. The bread went moldy all the time. Your bread goes so moldy. I get Sweden is better, maltose. But anyway, so in education they're not so bad. They're pretty okay. But I would say that we're very clear on the book that it's not just low taxes that give good outcomes. You have to have smart system design. But most low tax countries have actually good welfare. They have good system design. But I definitely tell people, if you want to learn from one country in the world, learn from Australia, Malta, Ireland. You hear it's Anglo-Saxon economies, but it's not the UK, right? These countries have really good welfare, good prosperity, good labor markets, good innovation ability. And they still have basic social safety nets. It's not that you're trading these high GDP numbers. It's like corporate welfare and etc. It's not about you need 44%, 50% tax level to, otherwise the children are starving. It's never about that.
It's about the fact that they're able to have those smart systems in the first place.
And also what we say is that the countries that are going to have, with aging population, etc., maybe they need to put some more money in public welfare. Maybe sometimes if you have a low tax model, you can do that. If you have a high tax model, you're pretty stuck. because everybody's hands is in the public coffin, and the resource-strong lobbies are taking the money. I mean, you have public choice. It's like an ideal. So the ideal version of big government doesn't matter, because big government, you have so many lobbyist groups taking
They always want more and more and more. That's
yeah, and how the resources are divided is never optimally to solve welfare. It's just is not. So but the book does go into the mechanisms for why actually it is that low taxes, not only prosperity, as you say, not only that, what's unique with us is low taxes in itself promotes better welfare if you have a good policy design.
And what are those mechanisms?
Well, one is the norms. Like if you have very high taxes, I mean, in Sweden, the massive deterioration of welfare benefits. I showed this in it's a Swedish paper recently, that the deterioration of the welfare benefits and the share of people who don't have that is both of them related to high taxes. So in high tax countries, the youth have lost this idea that you're not supposed to misuse government benefits you're not entitled to. And it's in Sweden, it's not just immigrants driving it, it's in the population. So you might say immigration and the fact that so many immigrants get on this poverty trap might make people say, what is this welfare state? Never mind, I'll cheat also. Maybe, but no, it's high taxes, which is the driver. So that's one example. Another example, if you want to take it, I mean, again, with integration, is you get massively, you see, if you see the low tax countries in our book, we show that they have lower unemployment of the highly educated, lower unemployment of the medium educated, but low educated people is a massive employment gap. So you get neighborhoods where many adults are not working, and you get very bad norms among the youth. In Norway, there's a natural experiment. So Norway has such a generous welfare state because they have oil money, right? 2% of the world's businesses are owned by the Norwegian oil fund, so they can pump money in generous welfare like nobody else in the Nordics anyway. So like the oil country with welfare. So they had a system before that. You could go to a judge and say, I have this welfare, I want more, which I'm not entitled to. And the researchers went and saw that there were two kinds of judges. Like those who were like nice, or I don't know, not really nice, but they were like give away public money, so they would grant. And those who were just never would grant this, they're like, no, you're not entitled. So it was a natural experiment because it was judge based. It wasn't based on your case. Some judges always gave, some never gave, and it was random from your side applying what judge you get. So it was a natural experiment. And so researchers studied the lives of these individuals and their children. Like, and it's like a natural experiment that you see one event forms the rest of your life and your child's life. It's like a real evidence-based research, right? So what they find is granting extra welfare leads to much higher risk of being dependent on welfare in the future, including the child, the next generation. So you're creating an intergenerational poverty trap.
Right. And a cycle of dependency.
And then you get obviously more people going into, I mean, if you're living all your life on welfare, you're probably also doing crime. I mean, are you completely passive all your time? So you're doing something and then so it's basically black income you can have as complement to welfare income, right? Because you can't have market income. I mean, they take away your welfare. So, I mean, it's just creating poverty.
And the incentives are just entirely off, right? Because you are incentivized then to stay on welfare benefits.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, as you said, work in the black market, work in the gig economy or the shadow economy, which is usually
criminal economy.
Yeah, which is usually with illegal or less stable income, which I find interesting. It's
illegal and less stable, yes, both.
It's concerning, I think, because of the state that the United Kingdom is in specifically. I mean, we are in a situation where thousands of young people are now being signed off as long-term sick and are not in work. We've just made the labour market much more stringent in terms of the new regulations that are coming into play over the next few years. And at the same time, we've increased taxes on employers, which makes it more expensive to employ people. So we've seen the number of vacancies available in the UK economy decline significantly, specifically as a result of these policies. So the government has gotten larger. More and more people are reliant on welfare. I mean, I saw recently, 1 in 5 people in Manchester are on benefits.
Yes.
It's a really, really quite shocking situation. And I suppose it is abundantly clear that those people don't have better welfare outcomes than they may do if they were in employment. And I suppose that's sort of the crux of the argument here, which is that in a low tax economy where you are incentivized to work because you actually reap the benefits of that work,
Right.
then you are much more likely to have better outcomes because you are investing in yourself as an individual. In a large, high tax economy where you are spending lots of money on welfare, you're crowding out that particular individual from being able to do anything for their own lives. And so the incentives are off and we get worse welfare outcomes.
And groups, families, communities, right? Particularly, not only, but particularly linked to, are we taking people from the other parts of the world to live off our welfare? What is that, right? And then you're robbing these people as communities of the opportunity to have upward social mobility.
Do you think
you might have middle class people from poor countries coming and becoming lower class people because at home they had a small business or were working, and now they're welfare recipients and maybe do some black market work, or you rob people of the dignity, and then you create all this social friction. So it really goes deeper than what we show in the book. I think definitely based on the Swedish policy experience and the research, you will have big problems with all of this in the UK. I was on French TV a couple of years ago, some debate, and I said it a couple of times about France, and it's same UK. It's like being in a hole and digging right down. All the big European countries are stagnating with big government, stagnating in all bringing business jobs, stagnating in growth, and the small ones are going on limited taxes, growth-oriented policies. Malta, Estonia, Ireland, many of the Central European countries, Cyprus. So really all of Europe is a big country problem. Doesn't work. UK can learn from you're doing all the mistakes Sweden did. There's so much research in Sweden about the outcomes of these policies not being the opposite of what you want. But I really think that if you want something, learn from the small countries and learn from the fact that many of the best countries in the world with limited taxes, and like also Australia, New Zealand they have Anglo-Saxon legal traditions. Why are you trying to combine Anglo-Saxon legal tradition with high taxes, big government, socialism? Whenever did that work? I mean, who said this works? I don't think anybody ever really published research or data. So no, it's gonna. But they say fail fast. So
fell fast indeed. Very finally, Nima, what sort of reform would you like to see in European countries that would improve welfare outcomes? What are the specific changes that you would like to see?
Well, I mean, I generally think they should shift to models like Malta, Ireland, Estonia, in general, and in fact, doing so you can get better welfare outcomes, and basically don't have these incentives where you have entire families, very low incentives to work. Doesn't make sense. And when it comes to the welfare systems, first of all, when it comes to education, I mean, clearly you should have like no excuses model, so you stop people bullying each other all the time. And it's good to have competition, school choice vouchers. And also I think apprenticeship is very good. Like Switzerland and Netherlands have 60% of high school students going to business. So I mean, apprenticeships work for thousands of years, but it's not an old system. It's just logical. It's for knowledge economy. Apprenticeships are good. And in health, do like Switzerland, and if you want to be a big socialist welfare state model, do like Netherlands, because it makes sense.
Have competition and choice. And I suppose what this does show is actually people are amazing. And when they are able to have the agency and the freedom to live their own lives and make their own decisions for themselves and spend their own money in the ways that they choose to, generally speaking, they are happier and better off for it.
Yeah, I mean, over government is like the foundation of urban capitalist models, right? Is to have a public sector, but you don't bloat it too big. As I said, Ibn Khaldun showed this in like the late Tunisia in the Middle Ages. It's been true since then. Don't bloat government. As you say, that's the reason why you say, but I mean, why bloat government? I mean, where does this idea come from that you can have government just increase it, and you get something free? I understand on a simplistic level, but on an academic, intellectual level, where do you find the support for that in data, in research? I mean, there's so much evidence-based research now. I've never seen, evidence-based studies that support big government being such a fantastic idea. Why can't you get what you want from taxing economy, let's say 25, 30%? You're going to have lots of tax revenues. It's going to be growing economy. Many people are going to be able to support themselves and not be victims because they have freedom to breathe. Why can't you do that? Why have to choke everybody with high taxes and regulation and just say, no, you just need a little bit more?
Yeah. Nima, this has been such a fascinating conversation. And I think that what this really does show is that you can challenge the conventional wisdom, and that actually, low tax economies are the best way forward when it comes to improving people's welfare outcomes. And the world would be a better place if we all listen to you, I think. So this has been really, really fascinating. Thank you so much, Nima, for joining me today. And thank you to all of our audience for watching and listening. If you would like to read Welfare State Myth, then do check it out on iea.org.uk. And if you're interested in learning more about the IEA's work, then become an insider subscriber over at insider.iea.org.uk.